The stagecoach rattled into Deadwind, crossing beneath a sky smeared orange with desert dusk. Dust clung to every board, every boot, every unspoken regret that lined the tired faces of the few who remained in the dying town. At the rear of the coach, a young man stepped down, boots thudding soft into the dirt. He was tall, too lean, and too clean for a place like Deadwind. Sheriff's star pinned to his chest, still bright enough to catch the last of the sun. His name was Eli Cutter. 24, freshly sworn, and alone. No one came to greet him. The undertaker peeked through warped blinds. The blacksmith leaned on his hammer mid-swing. A child playing with a wooden horse dropped it and ran. The wind dragged silence down Main Street like a funeral hymn. Eli looked at the jailhouse. The door still hung open, one hinge broken. Inside, the dried pool of the last sheriff's blood stained the wooden floor, black and cracked. A single bullet hole marked the wall behind his desk, a quiet memorial to his final stand. Eli stepped in and stood a long moment. He didn't flinch. He took off his hat, knelt beside the blood, and bowed his head. Outside, a slow murmur passed among the townsfolk. Too young. Too soft. He'll last a week. Eli unpacked in silence, set a cot in the back room, lined up his bullets with the care of a priest setting communion bread. He pinned a list above his desk, warrants unserved. 7 names, all belonging to the Vinegar Sons. No one knew why they called themselves that. Maybe because they soured everything they touched. Cain Grilly led them, a man whose voice once preached the gospel but who now spoke only through gunfire. They'd killed the sheriff before Eli, burned down the schoolhouse, cut off the banker's ears, and mailed them to his wife. The people of Deadwind had learned to look away. But Eli didn't come to look away. At high noon the next day, he walked into the Dustbone Saloon. It smelled of sweat, rot-gut whiskey, and rotted courage. 7 men sat around the main table, boots up, spurs off, guns laid casual but close. One of them was using the empty boot of a murdered man as a whiskey flask. Every head turned as the door creaked open. Eli stepped in, dust rising around his boots like ghost smoke. The barkeep paled. The piano player stopped playing mid-note. Someone muttered, "Oh hell." He walked to the bar, leaned in gently, and said, "Glass of milk." The barkeep froze, glanced at the table in the corner. A man stood slowly, lanky, scarred jaw, one eye milk glazed from a blade long ago. "You just order milk in a saloon full of killers." Eli nodded. "Calcium helps nerves." The saloon hushed into breathless silence. One of the gang thumbed the hammer of his revolver. The bartender poured, hands trembling. Eli sipped. "Slow. Calm. I didn't come to die fast, gentlemen," he said, voice steady as stone. "I came to last long enough to bury you." One of them laughed, short and sharp, but it died quick. Eli turned to face them. His hand hovered just above his belt, not resting on his Colt, but close enough to whisper threat. The Vinegar Sons didn't move. Not because they feared him, not yet, but because they didn't know what to make of a man who drank milk in a lion's den and smiled like he'd already laid traps. Eli nodded, thanked the bartender, and left. Behind him, boots scraped and whispers filled the space where courage used to be. By sundown, he stood behind the jailhouse with a shovel. The ground was hard, hadn't rained in weeks. Still, he dug. One grave. Then another. 7 total. Each one with a wooden cross. Each cross carved with a name from a list inside. He worked through dusk, through moonlight, sweat dripping down his spine, hands blistering. The town watched from behind curtains and shutters. "Gone mad," someone whispered. "Digging his own grave," another said. But Eli didn't hear them. Or if he did, he didn't care. He hammered the last cross into place and leaned against it, breathing hard. His shirt clung to him, dust caked around his collar. The stars above blinked down, silent witnesses. He stared at the row of graves. Empty holes waiting for dead men. He whispered each name under his breath like a prayer. Cain Greeley, Jude Slane, Cooper Vance, Tobias Griggs, Hector Rusk, Lou Danner, Clive Bishop. Each man had bled someone dry. Each had earned a hole. Eli turned, limping slightly from a stone he hadn't seen. He went back into the jailhouse, shut the door behind him, and lit a lamp. The glow softened the hard edges of his face. There was no bravado left in him now. Only weight. Only silence. He pulled a worn photograph from his breast pocket, a faded image of a family long dead. A mother's gentle eyes. A father with a sheriff's star, and a boy standing tall, too proud, too happy. He stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered to the flame, "You'll never burn this town again." Outside, the wind shifted. Coyotes howled somewhere past the ridgeline. And in the saloon, a man named Cooper Vance stopped laughing mid-sentence, looked out the window, and saw the graves under moonlight. Something in his gut turned cold. The rope creaked louder than the crowd dared to breathe. Eli stood at the edge of the hanging tree, only 10 years old, his hands clenched into fists too small to save a man but too stubborn to let go of the sight. His father, Sheriff Amos Cutter, was bruised, bloodied, but unbowed. The noose lay tight around his neck, but his eyes, locked on Eli, were full of quiet defiance, not fear. Kane Grilly stood beneath the gallows, grinning with crooked teeth and coal-black eyes. He wasn't the leader then, just one of many devils in preacher's clothing. The Vinegar's sons laughed from their horses, rifles across their knees, boots dangling like vultures waiting for the drop. They'd killed law, buried order, and turned justice into a joke. "Tell your boy," King called up to Amos, "what it cost to stand against us." Amos didn't flinch. "He'll know it's worth everything." The lever fell. The rope snapped tight. The boy didn't scream, but something inside him folded into iron. Years passed like stones grinding under floodwater. Eli vanished from Deadwind, name scrubbed clean. He reappeared in Texas under the alias Jesse Ford, joined the Rangers by lying better than most men told the truth. He didn't speak much. Didn't need to. His bullets talked plenty. Boone was the first to notice him. An old tracker with one eye, a limp, and the scent of pine smoke always in his beard. He taught Eli how to track a man from a single broken blade of grass, how to fire in wind so thick it sang, and how to wait, really wait, until your enemy showed their throat. "You got the kind of silence that frightens wolves," Boone once said, spitting tobacco into the fire. "But silence don't win wars unless you know when to break it." So Eli learned. Every day, every night. Patience. Steel. The language of killers and the scent of cowards. And when he finally disappeared again, no one knew where he went, not even Boone. Now, 10 years later, he stood inside Judge Mercer's office in Deadwind, hat in hand, revolver strapped low and tight. The judge leaned back in a velvet chair, fat fingers stuffed with rings, lips greased with bourbon and cowardice. "Sheriff Cutter," Mercer drawled, thumbing through a stack of meaningless papers. "I thought the state sent someone seasoned, not a boy with sand still behind his ears." Eli stepped forward, boots thudding heavy on the warped floorboards. The light from the window painted him half in gold, half in shadow. "You've been letting Kane's men slide for years," Eli said. "Drop charges. Delayed trials. Closed eyes." Mercer scoffed. "You think law works here? Outlaws rule the West, son. They don't fear paper." Eli dropped a leather envelope onto the desk. Dust puffed from it. Mercer frowned, then opened it with a grunt. Inside lay a single sheet, yellowed and fragile, but the seal still unbroken. Eli's voice was low. "Warrant for Kane Grilly. Issued 10 years ago. Signed by Governor Pierce himself. For murder, arson, robbery, and hanging a lawman without trial." Mercer's smugness cracked. "I'm serving it today," Eli said. "No more delays. No more bribes. No more blood on your hands that isn't yours." The judge tried to chuckle but choked instead. He dabbed his brow with a silk kerchief. "Boy, you got no backup. No marshal. No cavalry. They'll get you and pin that badge to your spine." Eli leaned in, voice sharpened to a whisper. "Then I'll die with my father's face still clean. Can you say the same, Mercer?" Silence stretched between them like a blade. Eli turned to leave, the warrant still lying on the desk like a curse. Outside, the air had shifted. The sky hung low and heavy, gray clouds gathering above the cliffs. Thunder murmured somewhere beyond the ridgeline. The town felt even smaller than before, more fragile, like a candle in a room of wolves. At the telegraph office, an old man in a visor handed Eli a slip of paper, hand shaking. "Just came in, for you, Sheriff." Eli read it once, then again. Just 4 words, scrawled in rough handwriting. "They know you're here." Then below, in smaller letters, "They're coming by sundown." He stared at the message, unmoving. The old man swallowed hard. "You got help coming, son." Eli looked up. His eyes were darker than dusk. "I am the help." And with that, he walked back down the middle of Deadwind Crossing, the wind whipping his duster like a flag of war, 7 names echoing in his mind like church bells for the dead not yet buried. They rode in from the east like a dust storm with teeth. 15 riders across the ridge, black shapes etched against the bleeding sky, their arrival slow and deliberate, a procession of menace. At the center rode Cain Greeley, coat flapping like scorched wings, had shadowing eyes that had seen too many men die and smiled through most of it. The Vinegar Sons flanked him, silent, eyes dulled by a lifetime of blood and whiskey. Guns rode low on their hips. Blood rode higher on their conscience. Deadwind Crossing fell silent. Chickens froze mid-scratch. A woman dropped her wash basin and didn't bend to pick it up. The undertaker stopped polishing his last coffin. From behind cracked windows, townsfolk watched the gang that had once owned this town ride in like they never left. Cain slowed his horse at the gallows in the center of town, the same ones his boys had used like their own front porch. He stared up at the beam, a faint smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. Then he turned his gaze toward the jailhouse. Eli Cutter stood outside the doors, alone. Cain dismounted slowly, every movement oiled by confidence. He walked across the street with the gait of a man unbothered by bullets or justice. His spurs didn't jingle, they whispered. "I remember you," Cain said, voice smooth as black molasses. "You were the boy with shaking hands and fire in his eyes. Let's see what's left of that fire." Eli didn't speak, didn't blink. He studied the men who'd ordered his father strung up like a dog. Cain hadn't changed much, maybe deeper lines around the eyes, more silver in the beard, but the cruelty still sat in him like a throne. Cain stepped close enough to smell the gun oil on Eli's shirt. "That badge, you wear it like it matters." "It does now," Eli said, voice low and grounded. Cain's grin faded. That night, Deadwind went dark. Lamps snuffed early. Doors bolted shut. The streets emptied like the town had been swallowed whole. Cain and his men took the saloon, spreading like oil across floorboards and card tables, daring someone to stand in their way. But Eli didn't sleep. He moved in the dark, through alleys and forgotten corners. He laid traps in the livery, a tangle of rope, broken glass, and kerosene that would burn faster than a prayer. Rifles were hidden in the church tower, aimed and ready, with crates of ammunition stored in the bell loft like holy scripture. The gallows loomed in the town square, newly built, creaking in the night wind. Its beam was thicker now. The rope was fresh. By midnight, one of Cain's men, Griggs, a drunk with a twitchy hand, stumbled out of the saloon alone. He wandered behind the general store to piss and never came back. Eli stepped from the shadows, quiet as snowfall. A punch to the gut. A twist of the wrist. Griggs went down choking on blood and dust. Eli didn't need to draw his gun. The jailhouse bars slammed shut behind Griggs an hour later. He cursed, screamed, spat at the walls. But no one came to listen. Eli sat at the desk, silent, sharpening a knife that he never planned to use. Outside, the church bell didn't ring, but the rifles inside waited. By dawn, word had spread. A rope was tied. A mun was led. No judge. No jury. Just law, old and cold. Griggs stood on the platform, eyes wild. "You don't have the guts, boy." Eli stared up at him. This town's lost enough blood to hesitation. And the trapdoor opened. The body swung. The wind caught it like a warning. Eli climbed the platform, hammered a note into the wood beside the corpse's chest. This is how the law starts. No one cheered. No one wept. But something cracked open in the hearts of the townsfolk. Something they'd buried deep. Hope, perhaps. Or justice. Or the belief that monsters could bleed. Cain watched from the saloon steps, jaw tight, hand twitching near his revolver. He didn't smile. The sun fell fast that evening. Orange gave way to purple, and purple to a black that swallowed the land whole. The air grew still. Then the fire started. A roar shattered the night. The schoolhouse lit up like a lantern kicked by the devil. Flames danced through the roof, licking at the sky, throwing heat and ash across the town. People rushed from their homes, buckets in hand, but it was too late. The building was already gone. Eli ran barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, smoke clawing at his throat. He pushed through the crowd, into the blaze, coughing, eyes burning. The walls groaned. Rafters collapsed behind him. He kicked through the last of the doorway, heart hammering like thunder in a canyon. Near the steps, blackened and melted but unmistakable, lay a doll. Porcelain face cracked. Dress burned away to ash. One glass eye gone. He picked it up with shaking hands. A child's doll. The fire roared behind him, but Eli couldn't hear it anymore. All he saw was that one innocent thing, abandoned in ruin. A girl's laughter that would never ring again. A classroom that would never open. Future turned to soot. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, doll clutched to his chest like a dying child. Tears came, uninvited and bitter. Someone stepped close. Boone, returned just that morning, watching with silent eyes. Eli didn't look up. His voice cracked. They don't stop, Boone. They don't care who they burn. Boone knelt beside him. You burned once too, remember? Eli's jaw clenched. That fire made me. Boone nodded toward the doll. Then let this fire remake you again. Eli rose slowly, the doll still in his hand. He turned toward the darkness where Cain waited, and his silhouette looked less like a man and more like a storm dressed in flesh. The church bell rang on Sunday morning, cracked and weary from years of silence. Its tone echoed through Deadwind Crossing like a forgotten hymn, low and trembling, yet unmistakably alive. The townsfolk heard it from behind their locked doors, felt it thrum in their chests. Some whispered prayers. Others loaded guns. Most just listened and waited. Inside the chapel, Sheriff Eli Cutter walked the aisle slow, boots echoing on warped floorboards. His colt hung heavy at his side, but his voice was steady as he read from the paper in his hand. Each name he spoke fell like a nail into the wood. Sheriff Amos Cutter. Marion Bishop. Tommy Rusk, age 6. Reverend Grady Ellis. Daisy Bloom, teacher, mother, widow. Each name was a ghost seated in the pews. Each one had bled beneath Cain Grilly's shadow. The air smelled of old pine and ash, stained glass painting reds and golds across Eli's face as if fire itself had come to worship. Boone stood near the back, rifle in hand, silent but ready. Beside him, 5 townsmen held their breath, holding nothing more than pitchforks, shotguns, or trembling fists. Eli reached the altar. We bury our dead, he said, voice low but thick with conviction. But today, we remember their names so the men who killed them can hear them from hell. Outside, hooves struck earth. The Vinegar Sons had come to church. A shadow passed over the stained glass. Then another. 12 in all, circling slow, like jackals sniffing for weakness. Cain's men didn't knock. They didn't pray. They opened fire. The first bullet shattered the cross behind the pulpit. The second took the head off a hymn book. Eli shouted, down. The pews exploded into splinters. Glass rained from the windows. Smoke filled the chapel like unholy incense. A boy screamed. Boone fired back, then ducked behind the pulpit as Cain's men unleashed hell. Eli was already moving. He slid behind the altar and kicked open the hatch beneath the floorboards, the same trapdoor where the Reverend once hid communion wine. Today, it would deliver vengeance. He dropped into the crawlspace, belly to dirt, heartbeat drumming like war. He slithered out through a hidden grate into the alley behind the chapel, smoke curling around him like a second skin. He had laid traps the night before. Bear teeth he'd borrowed from the butcher. Tripwires strung ankle-high. Buckets of oil rigged with lantern wicks. And smoke bombs, crude but effective, packed with sulfur and sawdust. The first scream came from the alley's edge. One of Cain's men caught the tripwire and was yanked backward, rope cinched around his ankle. He swung into a beam, head cracking, then hung upside down, gasping. Eli stepped from the shadows and drove his boot into the man's chest. The second never saw the fire coming. He'd crept toward the stables, hoping to flank the church. But Eli had doused a straw with kerosene, set a fuse beneath the trough. As soon as the door opened, flame whooshed into life, swallowing the rider in orange fury. His scream blistered the air before silence claimed him. Gunfire still tore through the church, but it was panic now, wild, disjointed. Boone had taken the high ground, firing from the choir loft like a ghost. The townsmen inside had started firing back. Eli didn't return to the chapel. He hunted. In the narrow alleys, he moved like smoke. One Vinegar Son caught a glimpse, too late, and dropped his revolver when Eli tackled him to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, but Eli's rage outweighed the man's fear. A knee to the ribs. A pistol whipped to the jaw. Blood sprayed the wall. Where's Cain? Eli hissed. The man coughed, spat, tried to laugh, then saw the look in Eli's eyes and said nothing. Eli pressed the muzzle to the man's throat. You took my father, he whispered. Now I take yours, piece by piece. A crack of the hammer. Silence. By nightfall, 4 of Cain's men were dead. Another had fled into the canyon. A rider spooked so bad he abandoned his brothers, vanished into the rocks, never to be seen again. Cowards don't leave footprints when they ride that fast. The others. They circled tighter around Cain, confusion replacing swagger. Their numbers thinning. Their fear growing. Cain watched from a rooftop near the saloon, eyes narrowed, jaw locked. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Deadwind was a town meant to kneel. Not stand. Not fight. He saw movement in the churchyard and narrowed his eyes. Townsfolk. They stepped into the street one by one, weapons in hand. Not lawmen. Not soldiers. Just people. Shoemakers. Menders. Mourners. Men who had buried sons. Women who had buried hope. The bell rang again, this time with no one pulling it. It tolled for the wicked. Eli stepped into the square, blood on his sleeve, smoke trailing behind him like a cloak of war. The town stood behind him. No one cheered. They didn't need to. Cain turned, descended from the roof, and disappeared into the dark. For the first time in 10 years, Deadwind Crossing belonged to the living. They ran for the rocks, the last of Cain Grilly's pack. 3 riders, burned and broken, trailed behind their master like shadows clinging to dusk. They didn't gallop. They limped toward the high, blood-colored cliffs of Devil's Elbow, where the sky seemed to end in stone and where old outlaws once strung up their own for sins too cruel to forgive. Cain had chosen the place for a reason. It was where betrayal met silence, where history bled into legend. Eli Cutter followed with no posse, no tin star gleaming on his chest. He'd wrapped it in black cloth and tucked it away. He wasn't riding under law now. Law was for towns. For sunlight. This was something older. Something darker. His Winchester lay across his lap, steel catching the morning light like a blade. His coat was torn. Blood crusted on his collar. The desert wind howled around him like it remembered his father's name. He left his horse at the base of the trail and climbed the rest on foot. Red dust clung to his boots, sweat streaked down his spine, and every step up the switchbacked ledges was an echo of purpose. The first shot rang out from the cliffs. Missed him by inches. Shale exploded near his face. He didn't duck. Just moved faster. Rifle steady, boot sure. He'd mapped this ridge when he was 12, sneaking out here to scream his father's name into the canyons. He knew every bend, every dead drop, every place a man could hide, or be buried. The second of Cain's men made the mistake of stepping into view. Eli didn't hesitate. One shot. The men tumbled backward off the edge, arms flailing, scream lost to the wind. Dust spiraled where his body vanished. The rocks grew tighter, narrower. Shadows deeper. Somewhere ahead, the other 2 waited. A boot scraped stone behind him. Eli spun. Too late. The blade sliced across his ribs, fire lighting up his side. He slammed into the wall, gasping, knees buckling. The outlaw lunged again, a scarred man with hate in his eyes and a Bowie knife slick with blood. Eli caught the wrist, twisted. The knife clattered. They tumbled to the ground, grappling in red dust, grunting, bleeding. Eli's fist slammed into the man's jaw once, twice, then the outlaw slammed a knee into Eli's gut and reached for the blade again. Eli rolled, grabbed a rock, and brought it down hard. 1 hit. 2. The moon went still. Eli staggered up, ribs screaming, blood soaking his shirt. He could feel the wound pulsing, shallow but angry. He left the knife, took the man's revolver. Now there were 2. Cain and the last one. He climbed higher. At the saddle of the cliff, where Devil's Elbow curled like a serpent, Eli crouched low and scanned the horizon. The air was thin, the wind colder. Below him, the desert stretched endless and cruel. The final outlaw moved to flank him, a young one, barely more than a boy, shaking but still deadly. He didn't see the trap Eli had laid. Tripwire. Tied between 2 stones. The boy hit the ground hard, rifle clattering from his hands. Eli was on him in a breath. "I ain't Cain," the boy gasped. "Don't kill me." Eli looked him over, too young to know what he'd become, too old to walk away clean. "You followed him," Eli said. "That was your first sin." He knocked him out cold and left him breathing. Then he turned toward the edge of the cliff. Cain stood waiting. The wind pulled at his coat, his boots planted at the very tip of the ledge, where one misstep meant nothing but sky and silence. His revolver hung loose in his hand, not raised, not ready, just waiting. Eli approached, 1 step at a time, like walking toward the edge of a dream. Cain tilted his head, studying him. "You look like him," he said. "Your daddy." Same stare. Same stubbornness. Eli said nothing. Cain smiled. "What are you now, boy?" "Lawman. Killer. Ghost." Eli unwrapped the cloth from his badge and let it fall into the dust. "I'm the one you should have buried with my daddy." Cain moved first, fast and hard. A shot cracked. Missed. They collided like animals. No warning. No elegance. Fists. Knees. Teeth. Cain pulled a blade from his boot and drove it into Eli's side. Eli roared and slammed the butt of his rifle into Cain's mouth, teeth breaking like glass. They went down together. Cain straddled him, hands on Eli's throat. "You should have stayed a memory, boy." Eli coughed blood, then headbutt Cain with all he had left. Cain reeled. Eli rolled, grabbed his rifle, and rose. They stared at each other, both bleeding, both broken, both too damn stubborn to fall. Cain took a step back. Eli raised the Winchester. "You don't have it in you," Cain said, voice low. "I had to find it," Eli whispered. "In fire. In dirt. In my father's shadow." Cain stepped back again, now one boot at the very edge. Then Eli fired. The gunshot echoed across Devil's Elbow, a sound carried for miles. Cain staggered. His coat flared in the wind. And then, he fell. Over the edge. Gone. The silence that followed was unnatural. No body hit. No scream. No thud. Just the desert wind, howling through the cliffs like it had witnessed something sacred. Eli sank to his knees, rifle slipping from his hands, blood pooling beneath him, eyes locked on the empty edge where Cain Grilly had stood. And somewhere far below, hidden in the shadows of the cliffs, the silence kept its secrets. The wind blew softer in Deadwind Crossing now. The dust still danced through the streets, but it carried no threat, no omen. It was just wind again, not a whisper of boots or blood. 3 months had passed since Cain Grilly vanished off the edge of Devil's Elbow, and the town had begun to breathe like it hadn't in years. Children ran barefoot through the square, kicking it through the dirt, their laughter loud and wild enough to chase ghosts from every corner. The blacksmith's hammer rang again. The saloon, once a slaughterhouse of whiskey and bullets, now echoed with music and bad poker hands. The piano played every night, off-key but honest. The jailhouse stood tall, its roof finally patched, its windows clean. Fresh whitewash covered the outside walls, and inside, the cells were empty, not from fear, but because law had returned, and with it, order. The town held itself upright now. Not perfect, not proud, but standing. Eli Cutter limped through it all like a man stitched back together by purpose. His left leg still dragged a little from the wound beneath his ribs. He wore his badge not on his heart but on his belt, where it could speak without shining. The brass had dulled, but the metal had meaning now. Worn by blood, earned in silence. He didn't talk much, but people nodded when they saw him, touched the brim of their hats, brought him coffee without asking. The widow who ran the bakery left warm bread on his windowsill every Sunday, and old man Wicks from the livery whittled a new cane for him out of cedar, even though Eli refused to use it. One afternoon, the townsfolk gathered by the square. A new sign was erected above the jailhouse, carved deep into cured pine, varnished and shining. Sheriff Eli Cutter, the day fear left this town. The words were simple, but no one read them without quiet in their throat. That night, the town slept easy. Eli didn't. He sat behind the jail heist, just past the glow of the lanterns, where the stars could find him. A fire crackled low, wood popping like old bones settling. The whiskey in his cup had barely been touched. His hat rested on his knee, and across from him, Boone sat with a pipe between his teeth, the smoke curling upward like a ghost with nowhere left to haunt. They hadn't spoken in a while. Boone had ridden back into town 2 days ago, not to hunt or teach, but to see if the boy he'd trained had become something worth remembering. The tracker took a long pull from his pipe and let the silence stretch. "You didn't just fight a gang, son," Boone said at last, voice rough as boots on gravel. "You changed what this town believes in." Eli stared into the fire, eyes half-lidded, jaw tight with something that hadn't left him since Devil's Elbow. Not grief. Not even pain. Just wait. "I didn't change anything," he said, voice low. "They changed themselves. I just held the line long enough." Boone chuckled softly. "Hell of a line, boy." Eli didn't smile. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of black cloth. The badge lay inside, dull gold under the moonlight. He turned it over at his hand. Thumb brushed the edges. "Wasn't sure I'd ever wear it again," he murmured. "Up on that cliff, with Kane breathing down my throat. I wasn't a sheriff anymore. I was just a boy trying not to break." Boone leaned forward, eyes glinting in the firelight. "You didn't break." Eli's fingers closed around the badge. The wind picked up. Sparks spiraled upward into the dark. For a while, neither man said anything. Then Eli whispered, almost to the flames, "Rookie sheriff took on a Notorious gang, and I reckon we all found out what bravery really means." Boone nodded once, slow. And in that moment, the fire didn't just warm them. It carried something deeper. A knowing. A kind of quiet that wrapped around the bones and whispered. It mattered. Eli stood, slow and steady. The badge vanished into his coat again. He looked up at the stars. And that bravery left the town and all.